Have you ever had that eerie feeling that someone's watching you, even when you're all alone? Or felt something strange, something paranormal, lurking nearby? The air is thick with unease. Every shadow feels like it's hiding something more sinister. If you've ever experienced this, then these stories will send chills down your spine. Listen carefully, because what you're about to hear might just make you question everything around you.
Hello, night owls. I am Dusky Nights, and I bring you real-life horror stories that will help you sleep, or maybe keep you awake. But before we start, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Also, do not forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel.
I never thought I'd be telling you a story like this. In fact, if you'd asked me a few months ago, I would have never believed something like this could happen. But here I am, questioning everything about my wife, my marriage, and the life we built together. My wife, Lynn, and I have been together for 6 years, married for just 11 months. We've had a normal life. I mean, really, there's nothing special or extraordinary about us. We go to work, we come home, we have dinner together, and we share our days. I could never have imagined that something like this would happen, something so out of the ordinary that I couldn't even recognize my own wife anymore. Lynn has always been kind, intelligent, thoughtful, and serious. She's the type of person who doesn't do anything halfway, and that includes her aversion to things like horror. She has never been into scary movies. In fact, when we first started dating, I begged her to watch The Shining with me. I was so excited because it's one of my favorite horror films. She only lasted about half an hour before she got so terrified we had to turn it off. It was a joke between us. She never liked creepy things, and she definitely wasn't the type to play pranks. That's why, when it all started, I couldn't make sense of it. It all began one morning, just 2 months ago, when I was running late for work. I had just made my coffee, and I knew I wouldn't have time to grab my usual Dunkin' Donuts fix. I rushed down the hall to the front door, hoping to get out quickly. That's when I noticed it. Lynn was peeking at me from behind the corner. All I could see were her eyes and a strand of her dark hair hanging against the wall. The rest of her body was hidden, but she was definitely there. I almost spilled my coffee from the shock. "Geez, Lynn," I said, startled. "You scared the shit out of me." She quickly vanished, almost like a child caught in the act. I heard her scurry off toward the living room, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. By the time I reached the front door, she was out of sight. At first, I just thought it was a joke. A weird, out-of-character joke, but nothing more. I shouted, "Love you, weirdo," and heard her laugh as I shut the door behind me. It was weird, sure, but I didn't think much of it. I didn't bring it up later that day, and neither did she. It seemed like it was nothing, a funny moment, until it happened again. 3 days later, it was about 2 a.m. I had woken up to get a drink of water. I was standing at the kitchen island, holding my jug of orange juice, when I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It was that gut-wrenching feeling. You know the one, when you feel like you're being watched. I looked down at the floor, and there she was, Lynn. But it wasn't her usual self. She was crouched behind the island, peeking up at me, with the widest, most unsettling grin I'd ever seen. Her eyes were unblinking, almost too wide for comfort, and her smile was like something out of a nightmare. I screamed. I don't think I've ever screamed like that in my life. I wasn't angry. I was terrified. And when I screamed, she quickly backed away, crawling on all fours across the kitchen floor like some kind of animal. I didn't chase her, didn't scream after her. I just stood there in shock, my heart racing. I couldn't understand why she would do that. Why? When I finally worked up the courage to go upstairs, Lynn was in bed, lying on her side, fast asleep, or pretending to be. I stood by the bed for a long time, watching her breath in the dark, wondering if she'd jump out at me again. The next morning, I decided to ask her about it. I didn't want to seem crazy, but I had to know what happened. "What was that about last night?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She frowned over her coffee, clearly confused. "What are you talking about?" "You were peeking at me again from over by the island," I said, pointing to the spot on the floor where I had seen her. She looked at me, her expression slowly changing to laughter. She laughed so hard that I couldn't help but laugh too, despite how unnerving the whole thing had been. "You creep me out sometimes," I said, trying to joke about it, but it wasn't funny. Not really. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Still, I let it go. After all, maybe she was just playing around, right? But the next few weeks proved me wrong. At first, it was just little things. I'd see her peeking out from behind the couch, or from the curtains in the living room. Once I found her inside her grandmother's old trunk, which sat at the foot of our bed. The lid was propped up just enough that only half of her face was visible, grinning like she was having the time of her life. I had no idea what to say to her. It was beyond strange. When I finally asked her why she was doing it, she didn't answer. She just shut the lid of the trunk, sealing herself inside. I was disturbed, but I figured she'd get tired of the game soon. But then, one night, everything changed. Lynn left to visit a friend. I stayed at home, just lounging on the couch, playing games on my laptop. It was about 9 p.m. when I decided to hop into the shower. I had just finished washing my hair when I felt it again. That terrible sensation, like I was being watched. I opened my eyes, and that's when I saw her. Lynn was peeking at me from behind the shower curtain. Her face was pressed into the fabric, her hair dripping with water, and her eyes were wide open, staring at me with that same terrifying grin. Her lips were parted in a way that made my blood run cold. I screamed. I jumped back, pressing myself against the wall of the shower. But she didn't move. She didn't blink. She just stood there, smiling, her makeup dripping down her face. Finally, she pulled her head back out of the shower, but I could still hear her footsteps retreating toward the bathroom door. A second later, the door slammed shut, making the mirror rattle. I stayed in the bathroom for over an hour, not knowing what to think. I couldn't even bring myself to open the door. When I finally got the courage to leave, I called her. I didn't even know what to say, but I had to ask. "What's going on, Lynn? What the hell was that about?" She seemed confused, almost too calm. "What do you mean?" she asked. "You were just peeking at me, like a creepy little kid. It scared the hell out of me." She laughed it off. "You're just paranoid." But it wasn't paranoia. I knew it wasn't. Then, a few days later, things got worse. She stopped peeking for a while, and I thought maybe it was over. Maybe she was done with whatever strange game she was playing. But then, she said something that chilled me to the bone. We were sitting on the couch watching a show. I casually mentioned how I hadn't seen her peeking around corners for a while. "I guess you gave up on the whole spy game," I joked. She looked up at me with a small smile. "Maybe I've just gotten better at it." I couldn't tell if she was joking, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Had she been watching me all along, and I just didn't notice? What was she getting out of this? I started checking corners. I started looking behind doors. I became paranoid. But then, after a few weeks of no incidents, I began to relax. I stopped checking behind furniture. I thought maybe it was all in my head. Then, a few days ago, everything escalated. Lynn had left for a friend's house. I was sitting on the couch playing games when I decided to take a shower around 9 p.m. I felt the feeling again, the sensation of being watched. I opened my eyes and froze. Lynn was there, but this time she wasn't just peeking. She was standing at the shower curtain, her entire head stretched through, her long hair wet and hanging against the fabric. Her eyes were wide and red. Her grin was like something from a horror movie. I screamed, but she didn't move. She just stood there, staring at me like she was enjoying it. I scrambled out of the shower, but she followed me. I locked the bathroom door, pacing inside, trying to calm myself down. But it didn't work. I couldn't get rid of the feeling that something was wrong. And then I heard it, a faint moan. I pressed my ear against the door. Was she standing outside, waiting to scare me again? I felt a surge of anger. I was tired of being scared, tired of being trapped in my own home. "What the hell, Lynn?" I shouted. But there was no answer, just silence. Then something happened that I'll never forget. I slowly opened the bathroom door. I looked down the hallway. It was empty. But then I noticed something I hadn't seen before. The closet door was slightly ajar, and from the small gap, I saw her. Lynn. Her eyes were wide open, her mouth twisted into the most grotesque smile I'd ever seen. She was crouched inside the closet, her hands trembling, her body shaking with excitement. She was staring at me, and that's when I knew this was no joke. This was no prank. I ran out of the house, fast. I didn't even grab my coat or shoes. I just ran to my car. I heard her laughter behind me, but I didn't dare look back. I drove straight to my brother's house. But even then, the terror didn't end. I still saw her face in my nightmares, and then came the text. I found you. And a picture of my wife, watching me from outside the window. I thought I was safe, but now I know I'm not. I don't know what's happening to her or to me. All I know is I'm not going back, not unless I have to. But something tells me she'll find me, and I don't know if I can survive it. I've been babysitting for extra cash all summer. It started off simple, just asking around school to see if anyone needed help watching their younger siblings. I began babysitting kids from families I knew, but soon enough I needed more money. That's when I put up an ad on Craigslist. It wasn't long before I received a reply. The family seemed nice enough, and they lived in a suburban area, just on the edge of a forest. What bothered me, though, was how isolated their house was, surrounded by woods with no neighbors in sight. At first I felt uneasy, but I told myself it was just my imagination. After all, it was extra cash, and the family seemed normal enough. The house itself was a cozy little cabin, clean and rustic, with a beautiful garden in the back. There was a gate leading to a trail that cut through the woods, and little lanterns hung around the yard, creating a warm, inviting atmosphere. A swing sat in the far corner of the garden, and inside the house, there was a large window in the living room that looked directly into the woods. During the day, sunlight flooded the space, making it seem peaceful. The kitchen, with its counters lined with plants and silly signs like "Home is where the family is," was right next to the living room. Upstairs, there were just 2 bedrooms, and the attic was small, with a tiny window facing the forest. The kid I was watching, Jason, was quiet. He didn't talk much, and honestly, I couldn't form an opinion about him. He didn't stand out. He wasn't difficult, but he wasn't the sweetest either. He must have been around 5 or 6, so I'd put him to bed early, and then wander around the house, out of boredom. I've always been curious about other people's spaces. I know it's not the best habit, but I'd sometimes snoop around when I was left alone. It was around midnight that night when I found myself in the master bedroom, pulling open a drawer that held all sorts of random trinkets, coins, pins, buttons, and little notebooks. The family seemed to collect these odd, useless items, and I couldn't help but inspect them. As I studied a small ceramic horse, turning it in my hands to see the moonlight glinting off its surface, I debated whether to take it. Would they even notice? But then the mood in the room shifted. The light from the moon no longer bathed the horse. A huge shadow suddenly covered it, dancing across its porcelain surface. My heart started pounding as I glanced around. The shadow was so large it took up half the room. I couldn't make out what was casting it. I froze, every muscle tense. Someone was at the window. My logical side tried to convince me it could just be a bird, but I couldn't shake the unease creeping up my spine. I didn't dare look up. What if it wasn't a bird? I stood perfectly still, trying to ignore the growing fear in my chest, until the shadow passed and the moonlight returned, casting its gentle glow over the horse again. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding and quickly shoved the horse into my pocket. I didn't know it then, but that would be my first encounter with whatever was out there. Something about the house made me stop snooping. I turned on the TV downstairs and curled up on the couch, trying to calm my racing mind, but then I heard it, a creaking sound from upstairs. It shouldn't have freaked me out, but I was already on edge. I had to check. The house was silent, dark, and when I went upstairs, I found the 2 bedrooms empty. Jason wasn't in his room. "Jason?" My voice broke the silence echoing through the house. "Where are you?" I called again, my voice trembling slightly. It was eerie. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. My gaze shifted to the attic door. It was cracked open. Instincts screamed at me to leave, but my curiosity got the better of me. What if there was an intruder? What if someone had taken Jason? If only I had looked up at that shadow outside the window earlier, I would know what I was dealing with. "Jason!" My voice was weaker now, barely above a whisper. "Yeah," came the response, almost immediately, and it came from the attic. It was so odd. Why was he up there? What could he be doing? I stepped toward the stairs. "What are you doing there?" "It's late. Your parents are going to be home soon." I carefully climbed the stairs, each step creaking under my weight. The attic was pitch dark compared to the rest of the house. A thin sliver of light peeked through, casting a strange glow that outlined a small figure. "Jason!" I called again as I reached the attic door. "What are you doing? You're freaking me out." I stepped inside and saw him sitting on the floor, staring out the tiny attic window into the woods. "What's going on?" I asked, moving to sit beside him. "What are you looking at?" Jason didn't answer. He just kept staring into the darkness outside. The window framed the view of the dense forest, an endless sea of trees, their branches twisted and close together, cutting off the sky. The forest seemed to swallow the horizon whole, a dark mass that stretched endlessly, as though it could consume everything. "What do you see out there?" I asked, trying to make sense of the situation. He didn't reply. Instead, he just stared. I couldn't understand what was so fascinating about the woods, but there was something about the way Jason didn't move that made me uneasy. It was like the night itself held him captive. "What do you think is out there?" I asked, trying to make light of it. "My mom," he answered again flatly. I laughed nervously, trying to brush it off. "That's not funny, Jason." "I'm not joking," he said, his voice serious. I wasn't sure what to say next. "Why would you say that? Your mom is nice. She doesn't eat people. She's just out with your dad. They'll be back soon, and if they find out you're not asleep, I'll be in trouble." "I'm telling the truth," Jason insisted. I stared at him, unsure whether he was joking or not. "What do you mean? Is she a vampire? Was she standing at the window earlier?" Jason's face grew pale, his eyes darting around. "Yeah, that could have been her." I shuddered. "Stop, don't talk like that." I tucked him into bed, trying to calm my racing mind. But then, Just as I turned to leave, he grabbed my arm. "Wait," he whispered. "I want to tell you about a dream I had. You have to listen." "Okay," I said, trying to play along. "I was in the garden, and I was thirsty. You were there, and you tried to leave, but there were bushes, and you got lost. I found a puppet." Jason paused, his eyes still wide as he looked at me. I didn't care much for dreams, but I had no choice but to sit there and listen. Jason's eyes flickered to the window, and I could see a shadow cover his face as the moonlight spilled in. He didn't want me to look, but I didn't turn around. "Thanks for the story," I said quietly. "Good night." But that night wasn't over. I stayed in the other room, fidgeting with the little porcelain horse I had pocketed earlier. The house felt strangely quiet now, but every noise seemed amplified in the silence. I kept hearing unfamiliar sounds, but nothing concrete. His parents arrived a little while later, and I greeted them downstairs, trying to act normal, but something about them didn't sit right, especially the mother. They asked if Jason had been good, and I said yes, but my mind was elsewhere. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, but I had to leave. "I'll take my bike home," I said, closing the door behind me. But instead of leaving, I headed to the backyard. I needed to see something. I climbed the fence and made my way onto the roof of the porch, right beneath Jason's bedroom window. I stared at the woods for a while, hoping to see something, anything. Then I saw it. The window was covered in scratches, but something wasn't right. There, in the hallway, something shifted. A coat hanger. Or so I thought. But then it moved again, dragging itself along the floor, its long twisted form slithering towards the parents' room. I froze, watching in horror as it stood next to the mother, who was sleeping. Its limbs were too long, its eyes wide and empty. It began counting, its bony fingers tapping as it moved closer. I watched in terror, unable to move, frozen in place. And then, just as I thought I couldn't bear it anymore, it turned and it saw me. I didn't scream. I didn't even breathe. I just ran. Ran until my legs bled, until I reached my house. I didn't care about anything else, only that I had to get away from that house. And now here I am typing this out, because whatever I saw in that house, whatever was lurking in those woods, I don't think I'll ever escape it.